Imagine taking a massive, heavy sledgehammer to a really delicate, intricate mechanical wristwatch, just because you need to fix a single microscopic loose gear inside it.
Right. Yeah, you'd never do that.
No, of course not. You'd smash the glass, you'd dent the casing, you'd probably crush half the internal springs, and then you just cross your fingers and hope that the sheer force of the blow somehow, magically nudged that one specific gear back into place.
It sounds totally absurd when you frame it like that. It's a terrible way to fix a watch.
It really is.
Ah.
But if we look at the reality of how we treat some of the most complex systemic diseases in human biology today, that is essentially what we are doing.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're doing.
We stop using the magnifying glass and the tweezers, and we just bring out the wrecking ball. When you think about conventional systemic drugs, especially things like traditional chemotherapy, we are effectively carpet bombing the entire human body just to hit a localized microscopic target.
The medical sledgehammer, yeah, the underlying philosophy for decades has been to basically flood the entire system with a therapeutic agent.
Just hoping for the best, right?
Right. Knowing full well it will cause massive collateral damage to healthy tissue. We're just hoping that the damage to the disease is slightly more fatal than the damage to the patient.
Which is pretty grim.
It is. It's a philosophy born of technological limitation, not some medical ideal.
And that is exactly why the stack of research we are looking at today is so monumental. So, welcome. If you're joining us, if you love a good aha moment and you hate info overload, you are in the right place for another deep dive.
We've got a really incredible stack today.
We really do. We are taking a deep dive into an absolute paradigm shift. We are putting away the sledgehammer and picking up the ultimate microscopic scalpel. Today, we are exploring the incredible, rapidly advancing world of nanobiorobots.
It is such a fascinating field.
It really is.
Yeah.
Whether you are curious about the future of healthcare or if you just want to understand how sci-fi is quietly becoming clinical reality in 2024 and 2025, this is going to change how you view your own biology.
Definitely.
We are pulling from a massive array of sources today. We've got clinical reviews on how we clear arterial plaque, an unbelievable deep dive study on magnetically powered, spiky nanorobots designed to tear through cancer cells.
That one is wild.
So wild. Plus a Frontiers review on targeted delivery and some groundbreaking university research coming out of places like Clemson and Stanford. Our mission today is to understand how medicine is shifting from using those sledgehammers to using programmable nanobots to fight humanity's biggest killers.
And the overarching theme in all these sources is really about autonomy and precision.
Right.
We're transitioning from passive medicine like, swallowing a pill and just hoping it floats to the right place, to active medicine, sending programmable autonomous agents to navigate the body, find the specific cell that is malfunctioning, and repair or destroy it without touching anything else.
But before we can get to the truly wild applications, like drilling through heart blockages or tearing into tumors, we have to understand the environment first.
Yeah, the physics of the microworld are completely different.
Exactly. We have to talk about scale. Because if I imagine a robot swimming through my bloodstream, I picture like a tiny submarine. But the rules of the universe don't work the same way when you shrink down that small, do they?
Not at all.
So let's establish the size first. How small is a nanobot, really?
Well, the prefix nano refers to 1/1000th of a meter. So in nanomedicine, we're generally operating in the realm of 1 to 1,000 nanometers.
Okay.
To visualize that, let's start with something familiar, like a single strand of human DNA. That's about 2.5 nanometers across.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. And a single red blood cell, which we usually think of as microscopic, is a massive behemoth at this scale. A red blood cell is roughly 7,000 to 8,000 nanometers wide.
Oh, wow. So a red blood cell is like a sprawling city, and the nanobot is just a compact car driving through it.
That is a really fair visualization, yeah. But the size isn't just about fitting into small spaces. What's fascinating here is when you shrink a physical object down to a few hundred nanometers, the physics of how that object interacts with fluids completely inverts.
Like the actual laws of physics change.
The physical laws you and I rely on intuitively in the macro world, they basically break down. And this is governed by a concept in fluid mechanics called the Reynolds number.
Okay, the Reynolds number. I saw this mentioned across all the engineering papers in our stack. It dictates whether a microscopic submarine can actually swim.
Right.
Break down the math for me conceptually, because I am not a fluid dynamicist.
Sure. So the Reynolds number is a dimensionless mathematical ratio. It compares two competing forces in any fluid environment.
Which are?
Inertial forces versus viscous forces.
Okay, let me make sure I've got this. Inertia is mass in motion. It's the reason a massive freight train takes 2 miles of track to hit the brakes and stop. It has momentum.
Exactly.
And viscosity is how thick or sticky or resistant a fluid is to flow. Like, water has low viscosity, but honey has high viscosity.
Yes, exactly. In our everyday macro world, the Reynolds number is very high.
Okay.
Inertial forces completely dominate viscous forces. Like if you're swimming in a pool and you do a strong kick off the wall, you can stop kicking and your body will continue to glide forward through the water.
Right, because my mass and velocity, my inertia, easily overcome the slight stickiness of the water. The momentum carries me.
Exactly. But as you shrink down to the 1 to 1,000 nanometer scale, inside the human bloodstream, the math flips entirely. Your mass becomes virtually non-existent.
Which means your inertia becomes non-existent.
Right. So the Reynolds number drops to vastly less than 1. In a low Reynolds number environment, viscous forces absolutely dominate.
So if I'm a 500 nanometer robot in a vein and I turn off my engine, I don't glide to a stop.
You stop instantaneously. There is zero glide. The fluid around you feels overwhelmingly thick and oppressive.
It's like a human trying to swim through a swimming pool filled with wet cement. Or, I don't know, incredibly thick, cold molasses.
Yeah, the wet cement analogy is physically very accurate. And this creates a massive engineering nightmare for propulsion.
I can imagine.
Because of that wet cement environment, any conventional macro-world propulsion mechanism is mathematically useless.
Right, so if I build a tiny microscopic boat propeller or a tiny jet thruster and strap it to the back of my nanobot, it shouldn't work.
It won't work at all. If you spin a tiny boat propeller in a low Reynolds number fluid, the fluid is so viscous relative to the size of the blades that the propeller will just churn the fluid locally.
It'll just spin in place.
Yeah, it will spin in place and generate zero forward thrust. The physics of how a Boeing 747 flies or a nuclear submarine moves simply do not exist at the nanoscale.
That is wild. So if the traditional engine is useless, how do we move? I mean, if you engineer a machine the width of a fraction of a human hair, drop it into a river of flowing wet cement and tell it to go upstream to find a tumor, how does it get traction?
Well, when human engineering hits a wall, we generally look to nature for the blueprint. Scientists looked at nature's original, highly successful nanobots.
Which are bacteria, right?
Exactly. Bacteria have been navigating low Reynolds number environments for billions of years. Specifically, engineers study the bacterial flagella.
These long, thread-like tails some bacteria have.
Yes, but they don't paddle them back and forth like a fishtail. The base of the flagellum functions like a biological rotary motor.
Oh, interesting.
It spins the entire tail, causing it to rotate like a corkscrew.
A corkscrew, because a corkscrew doesn't rely on momentum. It physically wedges its way through a solid or semi-solid material. It bores through the viscosity.
Yes, that biological mechanism directly inspired the design of what the sources call helical micropropellers.
I was poring over the material engineering of these helical micropropellers, and the complexity is staggering. We aren't just carving a tiny curly Q out of plastic.
Not at all.
You have a highly engineered, multi-layered composite structure. Let's break down the anatomy of one of these bots from the sources. So the main chassis, the framework itself, is typically made of silicon dioxide.
Right. Silica is chosen because it provides rigid structural integrity at the nanoscale. It's highly stable, and it serves as a really reliable base for adding other functional layers.
But silica is just glass. It doesn't move on its own.
Yeah.
So to actually generate that corkscrew motion, the engineers embed a magnetic segment directly into the silica structure, usually composed of nickel or iron.
And this is where we solve the power problem. A nanobot is far too small to carry an onboard chemical battery or a combustion engine.
Right.
So the power source and the steering mechanism have to remain outside the patient's body.
Okay, stop there because this was a huge mental block for me initially. If the power is outside the body, how does it grip the tiny piece of nickel inside the blood vessel without just ripping the metal sideways through my tissue?
It's a really common question.
Like if I hold a strong magnet next to my arm, wouldn't it just violently yank the nanobot through the vein wall?
It's a crucial distinction in magnetic physics. There is a profound difference between a magnetic field gradient and a uniform rotating magnetic field.
Okay, break that down for me.
If you place a powerful stationary magnet next to your arm, it creates a steep magnetic gradient. The field is stronger, closer to the magnet, and weaker further away.
And that pulls it.
Right. That gradient creates a translational pulling force, which would indeed drag the nickel straight through the tissue. We do use gradient fields sometimes for very slow, careful navigation.
But for high-speed swimming, like getting to a tumor fast.
For swimming, we use a uniform rotating magnetic field. Imagine being inside a room where the magnetic field is perfectly equal in every single corner, but the direction of that field is spinning in circles.
Okay, I'm picturing that.
Because the field is uniform, there is no pulling force in any specific direction. Instead, the nickel inside the nanobot simply tries to align itself with the direction of the field, like a compass needle.
Oh. So as the invisible magnetic field spins around the patient, the nanobot spins in place to chase it. You get pure torque, pure rotation without any lateral pulling force ripping it through the tissue.
Exactly that. You induce pure rotation. And this brings us to the geometric brilliance of the tail. The sources detail that the tail of these micropropellers is engineered as a left-handed helix with exactly 1.8 turns.
I saw that highly specific number. Why 1.8 turns? I mean, why not 5 turns or just 1?
Fluid dynamic simulations and just massive amounts of trial and error optimization prove that 1.8 turns provides the absolute peak efficiency for converting pure rotational torque into forward thrust.
Specifically in blood.
Yes, in a fluid with the exact viscosity of human blood. If you have too few turns, you don't displace enough fluid. If you have too many, the surface friction of the fluid clinging to the helix creates too much drag and stalls the motor.
So 1.8 is the mathematical sweet spot to wedge forward through the wet cement.
It really is.
It's a masterpiece of optimization. But the blood isn't just viscous water, right? It's filled with proteins, platelets, immune cells, things designed to stick to foreign objects.
Which is a huge problem.
Yeah, the sources note that if you just drop raw silica and nickel into blood, it gets coated in proteins instantly. It gets gummed up. So they apply a coating of perfluorosilane.
Right. Perfluorosilane, or simile perfluorocarbon compounds, effectively act like microscopic Teflon.
Okay, so it's nonstick.
Exactly. They create an incredibly slippery non-stick boundary layer around the nanobot. When blood proteins bump into it, they slide right off instead of adhering and building up an unwanted biological crust.
Which would ruin the aerodynamics, or rather fluid dynamics, of the helix.
It would completely stall it out.
And for the final touch, they add a protective outer layer of titanium or gold. This seals the potentially toxic nickel away from the body, ensuring absolute biocompatibility.
And it has the added benefit of making the bot highly reflective and visible to certain types of medical imaging.
Which is so crucial. So when you combine all these elements, the silica chassis, the nickel magnetic drive, the 1.8 turn geometry, the Teflon-like coating, and the titanium shield, and you subject it to that spinning magnetic field, how fast are we talking?
These micropropellers can achieve velocities of about 1.5 micrometers per second.
Which, I mean, sounds agonizingly slow to our ears.
It does, but relative to their body length, it is highly efficient. It allows these swarms to travel centimeter-scale distances within the dense vascular system in under 30 minutes.
That's incredible. We are wirelessly driving swarms of microscopic, Teflon-coated titanium corkscrews through human biology. But knowing how they move is only half the battle.
That's very true.
Reading through these papers, a logistical nightmare kept glaring at me. How do you actually manufacture something that small?
It's a massive challenge.
I'm picturing like a microscopic assembly line with incredibly tiny robotic arms holding microscopic wrenches, which is obviously impossible. You can't just mold this out of plastic.
You absolutely cannot. Okay, let's unpack this. The manufacturing required here sits at the absolute frontier of material science.
We have to invent entirely new ways of building things, right?
Yes. In the nanotechnology space, manufacturing is broadly divided into two opposing philosophies: top-down manufacturing and bottom-up manufacturing.
Okay, let's explore that. Top-down versus bottom-up. My immediate instinct is that top-down is like classic sculpting. You start with a massive block of marble or a slab of silicon, and you systematically chip away every single piece of material that doesn't look like the nanobot.
That's a great way to think of it.
And bottom-up is more like building with Lego blocks. You start with an empty table and you snap individual atoms or molecules together until a structure emerges.
That is a highly accurate conceptual framework. Let's examine the top-down approach first. This methodology is heavily inherited from the semiconductor industry.
People who make the processor chips in our smartphones.
Exactly. The techniques have just been pushed to their absolute physical limits. One of the primary top-down methods detailed in the research is electron beam lithography, or EBL.
I know traditional computer chips use photolithography, where they shine light through a stencil to carve pathways into silicon. But light has a limit, doesn't it?
It does. The wavelength of visible light is roughly 400 to 700 nanometers. If you are trying to carve a physical structure that is only 10 nanometers wide, using a photon of light is like...
Like trying to paint the eyelashes on a miniature figurine using a thick, heavy house painting brush.
Exactly. The tool is simply too massive for the required detail.
The photon is too fat.
Precisely. So EBL replaces photons with electrons. Because electrons have an incredibly short wavelength, the beam can be focused to an astonishingly fine point. We're talking about achieving sub-10 nanometer resolution.
Wow.
You use this tightly focused beam of electrons to revealing the microscopic shapes underneath.
Carving details that are literally only a few dozen atoms wide. That's insane. And there was another top-down method mentioned, focused ion beam milling.
FIB.
Yes, FIB. If EBL is carving with an electron scalpel, FIB is atomic sandblasting.
Atomic sandblasting. I love that.
It uses a heavy stream of positively charged ions, frequently gallium ions. You accelerate these heavy gallium ions and smash them into your raw material. Just brute force.
The sheer kinetic energy physically knocks the target atoms off the surface. You can use this to mill away material in 3 dimensions, sculpting the complex, sloped ridges of a nanobot's head with atomic precision.
Okay, so EBL and gallium ion milling are incredibly precise, but honestly, they sound extremely harsh.
They are very energy intensive.
They sound like they belong in a sterile, high-vacuum, zero-dust computer fab plant in Silicon Valley, totally divorced from the squishy, messy, wet reality of human biology. If these machines are going into our blood, shouldn't we be building them out of biological materials?
It's a very perceptive point. While top-down methods are vital, the biological bottom-up techniques are where the true elegance lies.
Like what? What are we building biologically?
Well, the most breathtaking biological manufacturing technique in use right now is DNA origami.
When I first read DNA origami, I genuinely thought it was a metaphor, like a cute name for something else. But it is entirely literal.
It is entirely literal. Since the discovery of the double helix, humanity has viewed DNA almost exclusively through the lens of biology. We see it as the carrier of genetic information, the software code of life.
Right, the blueprint.
But nanotechnologists look at DNA through the lens of structural engineering. They look at it as a physical building block.
Because DNA has a strict physical rulebook.
Right.
Right. The base pairs always match up in a very specific way.
Exactly. Adenine always binds with thymine. Cytosine always binds with guanine. It is highly predictable molecular Velcro.
So if I understand this correctly, you aren't writing genetic code to create a living, mutated organism. You aren't playing God with genetics.
No, not at all.
You take a long, inert strand of single-stranded DNA called the scaffold, and you design shorter, staple strands of DNA that will bind to very specific sections of that scaffold. And as those staples bind, they physically pull and fold that long strand into a 3-dimensional shape.
Yes, you use the chemical attraction of base pairs as structural lumber. By carefully calculating the sequence of the staples, you can force the DNA to naturally fold itself into exact predetermined geometries.
Like what kind of geometries?
You can build microscopic boxes, geometric tubes, functioning hinges, or even a microscopic clamshell. You are building structural DNA nanomachines.
A microscopic clamshell. That's crazy. And you could put a drug inside that clamshell, right?
That is the primary application. You encapsulate a highly toxic chemotherapy payload inside the DNA clamshell. You engineer the chemical lock on the outside of the clamshell so that it will only spring open when it physically bumps into a specific molecular trigger.
So it's totally safe until it hits the target.
Exactly, like a mutated protein that only exists on the surface of a cancer cell. The DNA bot circulates harmlessly, completely biocompatible, until it hits the target, opens up, and drops the payload at point-blank range.
But the math required to figure out how a linear string of billions of chemical letters will fold into a 3D box in a fluid environment. I mean, that is beyond human computation.
It is, which brings in the next massive layer of this field. The integration of artificial intelligence.
Right.
The complexity of protein and DNA folding is astronomically high. Historically, nanotechnology manufacturing involved agonizing years of trial and error prototyping.
Just guessing and checking.
Yes, but the integration of advanced AI algorithms has fundamentally accelerated the timeline. AI models can now instantly predict how a novel DNA sequence will fold in 3D space.
Wow.
They can simulate how a specific titanium-nickel alloy will endure the fluid dynamics of a 1.8-turn helix, all in real time.
So the AI is running millions of virtual fluid dynamic simulations before a single atom is even milled or folded.
Yes, and this AI integration is pushing the entire field away from just creating miniaturized, dumb structural machines. We are moving toward creating autonomous, intelligent, microscopic devices that can process environmental variables and adjust their behavior on the fly.
That is so incredibly powerful.
Mm.
So we have explored the bizarre physics of how they swim in viscous cement and the mind-bending ways we sculpt them out of silicon or fold them out of DNA.
Right.
Now, once built, these microscopic marvels need a battlefield. And when we look at the clinical reviews in our source stack, the most expansive and deadly battlefield in human biology is the cardiovascular system.
Absolutely.
We have to talk about atherosclerosis, arterial plaque.
Right.
It remains the undisputed #1 killer of human beings globally.
It is a profound systemic, mechanical, and biological failure. Atherosclerosis is fundamentally the accumulation of lipids, primarily LDL cholesterol, along with inflammatory cells, cellular waste, and calcium, deep within the walls of our arteries.
I want to visualize this properly for everyone, because it's not just grease coating the inside of a pipe like a dirty kitchen sink, right? The plaque actually builds up inside the lining of the blood vessel wall.
Yes, that is a critical distinction. The innermost lining of your artery is a single layer of cells called the endothelium. Over time, due to high blood pressure, smoking, or poor diet, that endothelium gets damaged.
And then the cholesterol gets in.
Exactly. LDL cholesterol slips underneath that damaged layer and becomes oxidized. The body recognizes this oxidized cholesterol as a toxic invader and sends the immune system, specifically white blood cells, to delete it.
But something goes wrong.
Right. The white blood cells gorge themselves on so much cholesterol that they die, becoming what we call foam cells.
So you get this massive graveyard of fat and dead white blood cells expanding inside the wall of the artery, pushing inward, narrowing the channel where the blood is supposed to flow.
Exactly. Over decades, this forms a hardened plaque. It restricts blood flow, causing angina, and if the plaque ruptures, it creates an immediate blood clot that completely blocks the artery.
Resulting in a massive heart attack or a stroke.
Precisely.
And reading the sources, there is a glaring, almost frustrating flaw in how modern medicine treats this. If I go to the hospital today with a severely clogged coronary artery, the standard of care is a mechanical intervention.
The sledgehammer.
The sledgehammer. They thread a balloon catheter up into my heart, inflate it to crush the plaque outward, and leave behind a metal mesh tube, a stent to prop the artery open. Or, if it's really bad, they do a bypass surgery, taking a vein from my leg and literally plumbing a detour around the blockage.
And to be fair, those interventions save millions of lives. But from a pathological perspective, they are purely macroscopic end-stage plumbing fixes. They only address the physical narrowing of the pipe.
Right.
They completely fail to address the underlying microscopic disease process.
Because they only treat the plaque that has already grown huge. They ignore all the younger, unstable plaques scattered throughout the rest of the cardiovascular system.
This raises an important question in cardiology, the moving target problem.
Explain that.
The plaques that often cause fatal heart attacks aren't always the massive, heavily calcified ones that restrict 90% of blood flow. Often it is the smaller, highly inflamed, vulnerable plaques.
The sneaky one.
Right. These vulnerable plaques have thin, fibrous caps covering a massive necrotic pool of dead cells and liquid fat. They are incredibly fragile and prone to sudden rupture.
And you can't really stent those.
No, finding, stabilizing, and neutralizing these unstable high-risk plaques before they burst requires a level of localized precision that a systemic drug or a static metal stent simply cannot provide.
Enter the nanobots. Based on the stack, there are two violently different philosophies for attacking arterial plaque with nanorobotics. The first is highly physical, which I call the drill,
Very fitting.
and the second is highly biological, which I call the Trojan horse. Let's look at the drill first, because the research coming out of the Max Planck Institute for Intelligent Systems sounds like a Hollywood sci-fi action sequence.
It really is the mechanical ablation approach. The researchers at Max Planck have conceptualized and tested highly specialized swarming mechanical nanobots designed to physically destroy the plaque architecture.
Let's talk about their dimensions.
Yeah.
How big are these drills?
To understand their utility, you must look at their scale. We are talking about devices measuring less than 150 nanometers in diameter and roughly 500 nanometers in length.
Less than 150 nanometers wide. That isn't just small enough to fit in a major artery.
No, it is small enough to navigate the capillary networks. Even massive blood vessels like the aorta have their own microscopic blood vessels feeding the artery walls themselves, known as the vasa vasorum. These nanobots are small enough to infiltrate those microchannels.
And structurally, they have conical, drill-like heads with sharp microridges. So walk me through the clinical procedure. If a patient is lying on the table, how does a doctor deploy a swarm of nanodrills?
It operates as a coordinated multi-step sequence. First, a vast swarm, potentially millions of these nanobots, is introduced into the patient's bloodstream via a standard non-magnetic needle injection.
Just an IV line, no chest-cracking surgery.
Just a needle. Second is the navigation phase. The patient is positioned inside specialized equipment that generates dynamic, gradient-based magnetic fields.
Like we talked about earlier.
Yes. By manipulating these gradients, the surgical operator can remotely steer the swarm through the complex branching labyrinth of the arterial tree. They can guide the swarm against the flow of blood, bringing them directly to the face of the atherosclerotic occlusion.
They park the microscopic drill fleet right against the wall of fat and calcium. Then what?
Then the operator initiates the ablation phase. They transition the external magnetic field from a gradient navigation mode into a high-frequency rotating mode.
And they start spinning.
This induces a high-speed rotation and forward thrust in the swarm. The nanobots engage the plaque surface. The conical, ridged heads physically bore into the fatty and calcified accumulation.
Wow.
Through high-speed mechanical agitation, they literally grind the plaque away, debulking the occlusion from the inside out.
Okay, wait, I have to stop you here. The physics sound sound, but biologically, my alarm bells are ringing.
Why is that?
If you take a high-speed fleet of drills to a calcified fatty rock inside a high-pressure blood vessel, you are going to generate dust. You are going to create debris. Doesn't that microscopic debris just get caught in the blood flow, float further downstream into narrower and narrower blood vessels, get stuck, and trigger the exact ischemic stroke or heart attack we're trying to prevent?
It is an incredibly astute observation. You have identified the absolute most critical periprocedural risk in this entire approach. Distal embolization.
Distal embolization.
Yes, it is a massive clinical concern. If you mechanically shatter the plaque, the resulting submicron debris could cause widespread microblockages downstream, a condition known as a no-reflow phenomenon, which causes severe tissue death.
So how do the engineers at Max Planck plan to solve it? Do we just make a tiny vacuum cleaner up the artery behind the swarm?
Endovascular flow control. Essentially using a catheter to create a localized vacuum to aspirate the debris is one proposed strategy.
But that's bulky, right?
It is bulky. The more elegant, purely nanobotic solution being developed is known as integrated capture.
Integrated capture. The swarm handles its own trash.
Exactly. The concept is that you do not send a uniform swarm of identical drills. You send a specialized, highly heterogeneous fleet. While a designated vanguard portion of the nanobots performs the high-speed mechanical ablation.
The drillers.
Right, the drillers. A secondary portion of the swarm trails immediately behind them, acting like a microscopic catcher's mitt.
Wait, how does a robot catch fat dust?
These secondary bots are functionalized with specific chemical binding sites or physical cage structures designed to phagocytose, to physically engulf and capture the resulting submicron lipid and calcium debris the moment it is generated.
Oh, wow.
They secure the debris within their own structure so it cannot float downstream, and then the entire swarm carrying the garbage is safely navigated out of the high-risk area.
A coordinated fleet with specialized roles. Vanguard drillers and rearguard sweepers. It's fascinating. And, it's worth briefly noting that magnetic drills aren't the only mechanical approach. The source stack also highlighted research from Northwestern University regarding sub-millimeter crabs.
Ah, yes. The shape memory alloy approach.
Right. Instead of using magnetic fields, they build tiny, multi-legged crab structures out of specialized metal alloys that change shape when exposed to heat. They use a highly targeted thermal laser to rapidly heat and cool the alloy.
And as it heats and cools, the crab's joints bend and straighten.
Exactly. It literally crawls its way through the blood vessel to reach and loosen plaque. No electrical parts, no magnetic fields, just heat-induced mechanical crawling.
It really highlights the sheer diversity of engineering thought in this space. If magnetism proves problematic in a specific tissue, we have thermal actuation as a backup mechanism.
But let's pivot away from the physical destruction of plaque. Because if the drill is physical warfare, this next approach is psychological warfare. Let's explore the biological intervention, Stanford University's Trojan horse and the CD47 protein.
This is brilliant biology.
My fundamental question when reading about arterial plaque was always, if there's a massive wall of dead cells and toxic fat rotting inside my artery, why doesn't my immune system just clean it up?
That is the core question in cardiovascular pathology. The immune system is perfectly capable of clearing dead cellular debris, so why does it ignore the plaque?
Right.
The answer lies in a deeply fascinating biological loophole centered around a specific protein known as CD47.
CD47, what does it actually do?
CD47 is a transmembrane protein that is highly expressed on the surface of the diseased, necrotic, and dying cells residing within the core of the arterial plaque. In a healthy body, CD47 serves a vital function.
Like what?
It acts as a highly specific chemical broadcast, an immune checkpoint signal. It literally translates to the chemical command, "Don't eat me."
Don't eat me?
Yes, it is a localized defensive broadcast. When the body's macrophages, the immune system's primary waste removal cells, the garbage trucks that patrol our tissues, approach a cell, they physically scan its surface.
Like an IFF transponder on a military jet. Identify friend or foe.
That is a perfect analogy. The macrophage locks onto the target. If the target is broadcasting the CD47 friendly ping, the macrophage recognizes it as self, disengages, and moves on.
Okay, so what goes wrong in the plaque?
The tragedy of atherosclerosis is that the dying toxic cells inside the plaque hijack the system. They upregulate their production of CD47. They aggressively broadcast the "don't eat me" signal.
Oh, wow.
So the macrophages arrive at the plaque, scan the rotting tissue, receive the friendly ping, and drift right past. The immune system is effectively blinded to the danger, allowing the necrotic core to fester, expand, and eventually rupture.
It's like a Jedi mind trick. The diseased cells are holding up a fake ID, and the immune system bouncers are just waving them through. So the researchers at Stanford realized they needed to take away the fake ID. They needed to block the CD47 signal.
Precisely. But historical attempts to do this were disastrous. If you just inject a patient with a systemic drug or an antibody designed to blindly shut down CD47 everywhere in the body, you cause catastrophic side effects.
But the healthy cells use it too, right?
Yeah. Because healthy red blood cells also use CD47 to keep from being eaten. If you turn off the signal systemically, the immune system goes rogue and starts devouring the patient's healthy blood cells, causing severe, life-threatening anemia.
Again, the sledgehammer. You can't use the sledgehammer, you need the scalpel. You have to turn off the CD47 signal only inside the plaque, nowhere else. How did Stanford achieve that?
Through an exquisite Trojan horse delivery system, they engineered incredibly small, single-walled carbon nanotubes. They loaded the interior of these nanotubes with a specific chemical inhibitor explicitly designed to neutralize the CD47 signal.
Okay.
But the brilliance is in the vehicle they chose for delivery. They didn't just inject the nanotubes into the blood to float around randomly. They engineered the nanotubes to be specifically phagocytosed, swallowed by a certain type of white blood cell called a monocyte.
Okay, why a monocyte? Why hide the weapon inside a white blood cell?
Because monocytes possess a natural biological homing mechanism for inflammation. When a monocyte circulates in the blood, it naturally seeks out highly inflamed tissues. And an atherosclerotic plaque is essentially a raging chemical fire of inflammation.
So the monocyte swallows the carbon nanotube. The monocyte follows its natural biological programming and swims directly into the heart of the arterial plaque, completely bypassing the healthy tissue.
Exactly. It infiltrates the fortress. Once the monocyte is deep inside the necrotic core of the plaque, the Trojan horse opens. The carbon nanotube releases its payload.
And the drug floods the area.
The chemical inhibitor floods the local microenvironment, immediately binding to and deactivating the CD47 "don't eat me" signal on the diseased cells.
And the IFF transponder goes dark. The fake ID is revoked.
And the moment that signal drops, a massive biological awakening occurs. A process known as efferocytosis is violently reactivated.
Efferocytosis, the cellular cleanup.
The local macrophages suddenly realize they are surrounded by a massive pile of toxic waste. Without the CD47 signal suppressing them, they become hyper-aggressive. They begin rapidly engulfing and digesting the diseased cells, the oxidized lipids, and the cellular debris.
They actively clear out the necrotic core of the plaque from the inside out. And when you look at the data drops in the Stanford study, the results are genuinely stunning.
They are very promising.
In advanced animal models, this precision nanotherapy didn't just stop the plaque from growing. In early-stage plaque buildup, it reduced the plaque volume by 40%. And even in heavily advanced stubborn plaques, it reduced the volume by 20%.
And crucially, because the nanotubes were hidden inside the homing monocytes, the payload was completely localized.
Right. The treatment completely avoided the severe systemic anemia that derailed all previous attempts. We are talking about shrinking the deadliest disease on Earth by reawakening the body's own immune system.
It is a masterclass in utilizing the body's inherent biological pathways rather than trying to overpower them with blunt chemical force.
And Stanford isn't the only institution achieving breakthroughs on the biological front. I really want to highlight a spotlight study from Clemson University. This research centers around a scientist named Ali Bronner. Reading her work was fascinating because it grounds this highly theoretical science in the messy, frustrating reality of laboratory trial and error.
Bronner's research targets the exact same overarching problem, atherosclerosis, but she approaches it from an entirely different biochemical angle.
Right, she's not just using macrophages.
While traditional statin pills work systemically in the liver to lower your overall cholesterol production, Bronner's nanotherapy targets the vascular system directly at the exact site of the plaque formation.
She utilized an engineered nanoparticle called a polymersum. These are tiny synthetic hollow spheres, but she faced a massive targeting problem. If you inject 1 billion hollow spheres into a rushing bloodstream, how do you guarantee they stick only to the diseased, inflamed blood vessel walls and just wash right past the healthy blood vessels?
To solve the targeting problem, she functionalized the surface of the polymersums. She coated the outside of the spheres with a highly specific peptide sequence known as a VHPK address label.
I need to unpack that. A VHPK address label. When we use the word label, we think of text printed on a sticker. But at the molecular scale, an address label is a physical geometry, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. VHPK refers to a specific chain of amino acids. And because of the chemical charges of those specific amino acids, the chain naturally folds into a very distinct three-dimensional physical shape.
It acts as a highly complex physical key.
Right. This specific key is designed to perfectly slot into a corresponding lock, a specific receptor protein that only appears on the surface of endothelial cells when they are inflamed and diseased.
So if the polymersum bumps into a healthy cell, the key doesn't fit the lock and it just washes away.
Exactly. When it bumps into an inflamed cell, the key snaps into the lock, tethering the nanobot to the vessel wall.
But this is where Bronner hit a wall in the lab. In theory, you just glue the keys to the sphere and you're done. But in reality, when she first coated her polymersums with these VHPK address labels, she noted that the nanoparticles started sticking to each other.
Yeah, she described them clumping together like wet spaghetti.
Wet spaghetti. They aggregated, which increased their size, ruined their fluid dynamics, and prevented them from entering the microvasculature.
This is the brutal reality of translational nanotechnology. The biochemical balance is unimaginably delicate. By adding the peptide keys, she altered the surface charge and the hydrophobicity of the particles, causing them to attract one another.
So she had to iterate.
She had to undergo painstaking iterative optimization of the chemical formulation, adjusting the ratios of the polymers to achieve a stable suspension that prevented the spaghetti clumping while still maintaining enough VHPK keys to successfully anchor to the inflamed cells.
And once she solved the clumping and the polymersum successfully anchors to the diseased cell, we get to the payload. Bronner didn't pack a toxic chemical inside. She packaged therapeutic plasmid DNA.
That's the real magic here.
Once the polymersum is anchored, it is absorbed into the inflamed cell. It opens up and it delivers this DNA directly to the cell's nucleus. And this DNA acts as a highly specific set of genetic instructions. It tells the cell to locate a specific microscopic genetic switch called miR33A5P and turn it completely off.
And that specific genetic switch is the crux of the pathology.
Okay, what does miR33A5P actually do? If I flip that switch off, what happens inside the cell?
Well, in a diseased cholesterol-laden foam cell, the miR33A5P switch is stuck in the on position, and its primary function is suppressive. It actively suppresses the cell's ability to manufacture a vital helper protein known as ABCA1.
ABCA1, what is its job?
ABCA1 functions as an efflux pump. It is a biological motor that sits on the cell membrane and actively pushes accumulated toxic cholesterol out of the interior of the cell and into the bloodstream.
But because the disease process keeps the MIR switch turned on, the ABCA1 pumps are shut down.
Exactly. The cell becomes a trap for cholesterol, swelling until it dies.
Oh, wow. So when Bronner's DNA payload enters the cell and forcefully turns off the MIR switch, the suppression is lifted.
The suppression is lifted, and the cell is suddenly liberated. It immediately begins mass-producing the ABCA1 helper proteins. Millions of these efflux pumps embed themselves in the cell membrane and begin aggressively pumping the hoarded cholesterol out of the diseased cell.
Wait. If millions of cells suddenly start vomiting cholesterol back into my bloodstream, doesn't that just cause a massive clog somewhere else? Where does the extruded cholesterol go?
It is handled by the body's natural reverse cholesterol transport system. The cholesterol is pushed out into the extracellular space, where it is immediately captured by circulating HDL.
High-density lipoprotein, which we call the good cholesterol.
Right. HDL acts as the body's biological garbage truck. It binds to the extruded cholesterol, safely transports it away from the vascular walls, carries it back to the liver, where it is broken down into bile acids and safely excreted through the digestive tract.
It is breathtaking. Bronner's therapy doesn't just stop new plaque from forming. It issues a genetic command that forces the disease cells to empty their toxic reserves, utilizing the body's own garbage trucks to cart it away. It actively reverses the root cause of the plaque.
It is a phenomenal demonstration of how nanotechnology can rewrite pathological cellular behavior.
So in the cardiovascular system alone, we have explored nanobots physically drilling through calcified blockages. We've seen Trojan horses revoke the CD47 fake ID so the immune system devours the plaque. And we've seen DNA mail carriers deliver genetic code to force cells to spit out their fat.
It's an incredible arsenal. But here is where we need to push into even darker territory. What happens when the target isn't a passive accumulation of fat in a clogged pipe? What happens when the target is a heavily armored, hyper-mutated, actively hostile enemy that adapts to resist our strongest drugs? I'm talking about the cancer battleground.
Oncology presents a fundamentally different and often far more aggressive set of physical and biological barriers compared to cardiology.
A tumor is not just a lump of cells.
No, it is a complex, fortified microenvironment. In systemic chemotherapy, the first massive hurdle is simply breaching the physical cell membrane. Cancer cells are notoriously dense and difficult to penetrate.
All right.
But even if you manage to force the chemotherapy drug across the membrane, many aggressive tumors deploy a secondary defense mechanism known as the drug efflux barrier. I read about this drug efflux phenomenon, and it is infuriating. You can spend $1 billion developing a masterfully complex, cancer-killing chemical molecule. You endure the agony of systemic chemotherapy. You finally get the drug inside the cytoplasm of the tumor cell, and the cancer cell literally pumps the drug back out into the bloodstream before it has time to poison the nucleus.
It is the biological equivalent of bailing water out of a sinking boat. The cancer cell massively upregulates the expression of specific transport proteins, like P-glycoprotein, on its membrane.
And they just kick the drug out.
These proteins act like highly efficient bouncers. They recognize the alien structure of the chemotherapy agents, bind to them, and use cellular energy to physically expel them from the intracellular space.
Which is a primary driver of multi-drug resistance, right?
Exactly. It leads to the tragic failure of chemotherapy in so many patients. The drug simply cannot stay inside the cell long enough to be lethal.
So, if the chemical approach is being defeated by biological bouncers, how does nanotechnology fight back? Here's where it gets really interesting. This brings us to a specific study in the stack that I found utterly terrifying and brilliant. MAUNSS, magnetic gold nanospikes.
They are an exquisite, brutal piece of mechanical engineering at the nanoscale.
These things look like microscopic weapons of war.
To visualize a MAUNS, imagine a microscopic sea urchin. They are roughly 500 nanometers in overall diameter. At the very center, they possess a solid core structured with gold nanospikes radiating outward.
Okay.
This gold core is then enveloped in a 40 nanometer thick layer of nickel, which provides the necessary magnetic responsiveness. Finally, the entire spiky structure is sealed within a 20 nanometer layer of titanium.
And the titanium isn't just to make it shiny. It seals the toxic nickel away, making it biocompatible while maintaining the structural rigidity of the spikes. But reading the paper, it's the exact geometry of those spikes that is so critical.
The researchers didn't just make them bumpy.
No, they measured the angles meticulously. The tips of these spikes taper down to incredibly sharp points, forming angles somewhere between 5 to 20 degrees. These aren't bumps, they are microscopic daggers. So how do we deploy a fleet of magnetic sea urchins against a drug-resistant cancer cell?
It relies heavily on the physical interaction between those 5 to 20-degree titanium spikes and the lipid bilayer of the cancer cell's membrane. The procedure begins by introducing the MAUNSs and allowing them to localize around the tumor tissue.
Okay, so they cluster.
Once they are densely clustered around the cancer cells, the clinical operators activate an external rotating magnetic field. The study specifically utilized a rotation frequency of about 16 hertz.
16 rotations per second.
Yes. Under the influence of this spinning field, the spiky nanobots are subjected to intense rotational torque. They begin to rapidly roll, grind, and spin directly against the exterior surface of the cancer cell membrane.
And because of those unimaginably sharp daggers, they aren't just harmlessly bumping against the wall. I want to picture the lipid bilayer. It's made of millions of tiny fat molecules lined up side by side, holding the cell together through weak chemical bonds. When a 5-degree titanium spike spinning at 16 hertz hits that wall, what physically happens at the molecular level?
The mechanical agitation is so violent and the focal point of the spike is so narrow that it overcomes the van der Waals forces holding the lipid molecules together.
It just shreds it.
The spinning spikes literally wedge between the lipids and tear microscopic physical pores straight through the bilayer. They shred the cellular envelope.
They drill holes in the fortress wall.
Precisely. And this achieves something profound in the context of oncology. By physically rupturing the membrane, the MAUNSs destroy the cancer cell's primary defense mechanism against chemotherapy.
The drug efflux bouncers we discussed earlier.
They are rendered completely useless. It doesn't matter how fast the cell pumps the drug out if there are thousands of literal holes torn in its membrane. The structural integrity is compromised, allowing small molecule chemotherapy drugs. In this specific in vivo study, they utilized DOX, or doxorubicin, to flood into the intracellular space entirely unimpeded.
The cancer cell cannot bail the water out fast enough because the hull is breached. Let's talk about the data drop on this, because the results from this study aren't just incremental improvements, they are staggering.
Yeah.
They tested this in vivo on living mice that had been implanted with hep G2 liver tumors. These are aggressive, resilient tumors. What was the outcome?
The statistical divergence between the groups is highly significant. In the control group, which received either no treatment or standard passive doxorubicin chemotherapy, the survival rate over a 50-day observation period was a dismal 10%.
The drug alone simply could not overcome the tumor's defenses.
Exactly. But in the magnetic plus drug experimental group, where the mice received the exact same dose of doxorubicin, but combined with the mechanical 16 hertz rotation of the nanospikes, the survival rate leaped to a flawless 100% over that same 50-day period. Not a single subject was lost.
Wait, a 100% survival rate? That is insane.
It is. Furthermore, in autopsies, they measured a 61.1% suppression rate in the physical volume and mass of the tumors.
A leap from a 10% survival rate to a 100% survival rate.
Mm-hmm.
When I read that, I had to pause. What does this mean for the fundamental future of oncology? Are we looking at the obsolescence of traditional systemic chemotherapy?
It signifies a massive paradigm shift toward non-chemically dependent, high-precision physical interventions. As we discussed, traditional chemotherapy relies entirely on complex biochemical pathways.
Which mutate.
And because cancer is fundamentally a disease of mutation, a cancer cell can, given enough time, mutate a biochemical workaround to resist almost any chemical drug. But a cancer cell cannot easily mutate a biological defense against a spinning titanium spike, physically tearing its membrane apart. The laws of physics supersede biological mutation.
That makes total sense.
By combining a physical-mechanical breach with a chemical payload, you drastically lower the threshold of drug required to achieve lethality. You can use significantly lower, less toxic doses of chemotherapy, thereby minimizing the horrific systemic side effects, hair loss, immune suppression, gastrointestinal destruction, while simultaneously maximizing the localized lethality precisely at the tumor site.
A physical breach to guarantee chemical delivery. It's brilliantly brutal. But as I was marveling at these spinning sea urchins and mechanical drills, a massive logistical question kept nagging at me. We have engineered these incredible microscopic weapons, but a weapon is totally useless if you don't know where to aim it or if you can't transport it to the front lines.
That is the big catch.
The human body is a vast, twisting, heavily fortified labyrinth. How are we actually locating these tiny hidden diseases, and how are we deploying these fleets into the body in the first place?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, navigation, diagnostics, and deployment are arguably the most complex engineering hurdles in the entire nanotechnology field. It is a dual problem. You cannot treat what you cannot find.
Right.
In cardiovascular disease, locating a tiny, vulnerable, rupture-prone plaque hidden in a vast arterial network is often far more difficult than deploying the therapy to treat it. This critical dual necessity has given rise to the rapidly expanding field of theranostics.
Theranostics, a portmanteau of therapeutics and diagnostics.
Yeah.
The ability to find the disease and cure the disease simultaneously with the exact same machine.
Exactly. You merge the scout and the infantryman into a single unit. Our source material highlights a brilliant example of a theranostic agent developed by researchers at the National University of Singapore, NCP nanoparticles.
Tell me about these.
These particles are chemical masterpieces. They are engineered with a specific, highly sensitive, pH-responsive chemical linker. In a normal, healthy bloodstream, the ambient pH is neutral, roughly 7.4. As long as the NCP nanoparticle is floating through neutral blood, the chemical linker remains tightly sealed and the particle is completely stable.
It stays locked.
Yeah.
But the localized microenvironment around a dangerous inflamed plaque or deep within the necrotic core of a rapidly growing tumor isn't neutral, is it? It's highly acidic.
It is heavily acidic. Due to the intense metabolic activity, cellular death, and inflammation, the localized TH can plummet to around 6.5 or lower.
And when the bod hits that acid,
when the circulating NCP nanoparticle floats into that specific acidic microenvironment, the pH-responsive linker rapidly dissolves. The structural integrity of the particle collapses, it breaks open, and it violently releases two distinct payloads simultaneously.
The theranostic double whammy. Unpack the two payloads for me.
Payload number 1 is gadolinium. Gadolinium is a heavy metal that functions as a highly effective contrast agent used in standard MRI scans.
So it lights up.
This satisfies the diagnostic mandate. When the particles break open and flood the acidic plaque with gadolinium, that specific microscopic location lights up brilliantly on a real-time MRI monitor. It allows the clinical team to visually see the exact location, size, and severity of the hidden dangerous plaque.
Wow. And the second payload?
Payload number 2, released at the exact same millisecond, is a therapeutic drug. Simvastatin.
Wait, simvastatin. I know people who take that. Millions of people take a generic simvastatin pill every single morning to manage their cholesterol. Why go through the multi-million-dollar effort to put a cheap, common drug inside a high-tech nanobot?
Because of the profound limitations of systemic bioavailability and toxicity, when a patient swallows a simvastatin pill orally, that drug must pass through the harsh acidic environment of the stomach, be absorbed into the intestines, and then endure first-pass metabolism in the liver.
And the liver just chews it up.
The liver brutally filters and breaks down the vast majority of the drug. By the time the remnants of that pill finally circulate to the actual arterial plaque in the heart, only an infinitesimal fraction of the active ingredient remains.
So to get enough to the heart, you have to take a huge pill.
Exactly. To get a high enough dose to the plaque, you have to give the patient a massive oral dose, which bathes the entire body in statins, leading to severe systemic side effects like debilitating muscle pain, myopathy, or liver damage.
The sledgehammer strikes again. But if you put it in the NCP nanoparticle,
by locking the simvastatin inside the pH-responsive nanoparticle, the drug is completely shielded from the stomach, the intestines, and the liver. It remains inert until it is deposited directly into the acidic core of the plaque.
Oh, that is so smart.
The researchers documented that this targeted delivery method achieved a localized concentration of simvastatin at the lesion site that was 1,000 times higher than what could be achieved with a standard oral pill.
1,000 times the payload, delivered precisely to the millimeter where it's needed, with zero exposure to the liver or the muscles. It's astonishing. And there's another theranostic example in our stack that takes this dual action concept even further. The porphyrin lipid particles developed by THMRI, the South Australian Health and Medical Research Institute. Reading their specs, these things are basically glowing radioactive plaque hunters.
They represent the cutting edge of multimodal theranostics. These are ultra-small 20-nanometer organic particles constructed around a porphyrin lipid core.
What makes them so special?
This specific biochemical core possesses an incredible inherent property. It naturally fluoresces or emits a bright glow when exposed to near-infrared light. Additionally, the outer lipid shell is engineered so it can be easily tagged with a radioactive isotope, such as copper-64, allowing it to be tracked by a PET scan.
So they are effectively carrying a microscopic flare gun. They circulate, they find the inflamed plaque, they bind to it, and they shoot off a radioactive flare that the hospital's PET scanner detects, saying, hey, a massive, vulnerable plaque is located right here.
That constitutes the highly sensitive diagnostic phase. but their therapeutic phase is equally robust. In rigorous preclinical trials, these porphyrin lipid particles demonstrated what the investigators classified as a triple threat capability.
What triple threat?
Number one, the precise diagnostic identification via PET and near-infrared fluorescence.
Number two.
They exhibited a powerful therapeutic effect by significantly increasing cholesterol efflux. They physically bound to the diseased cells and facilitated the extraction of cholesterol, increasing localized clearance rates by an impressive 49%.
And number three.
Number three, they actively suppressed the local inflammatory response by downregulating key genetic inflammatory pathways within the cells, specifically the NF-kappa B pathway, reducing overall inflammation markers by 53%.
Find the bomb, drain the fuel, and cut the fuse. A triple threat. It's brilliant. But let's step back and look at the actual logistics of getting these bots into the body.
The administration routes are just as innovative.
Right. Because in almost all these examples, I naturally assume the patient is in a clinical setting, a doctor finds a vein, and the nanobots are injected via an IV directly into the rushing bloodstream. But the sources outline some entirely new routes of administration that sound like they were ripped straight from a sci-fi novel. Let's talk about the oral route first. Swallowing a pill full of robots. From a purely visceral standpoint, that induces a bit of an ick factor. But biologically, how do they survive? The human stomach is a vat of hydrochloric acid designed to dissolve organic matter.
The gastrointestinal tract is arguably the most hostile, unforgiving chemical environment in the human body outside of the liver. To survive the extreme low pH and the churning mechanical forces of the stomach, researchers had to abandon fragile lipid shells. They developed a platform known as the TBY robot, which stands for Twin Bioengine Robot.
Twin bioengine. What does that mean?
Instead of fabricating a chassis out of metal or synthetic polymers, they hijacked biology. They use hollowed-out yeast microcapsules as the protective armor.
Yeast. Like baking yeast.
Precisely. Through millions of years of evolution, yeast cells have developed incredibly robust, thick cell walls, specifically adapted to survive highly acidic, harsh environments. The researchers hollow out the yeast, pack the therapeutic nanobots inside, and the patient swallows the capsule.
And it survives the stomach acid.
The yeast shell acts as an impenetrable biological shield, safely protecting the delicate nanomachines as they pass through the acid bath of the stomach.
Okay, the yeast shield gets them past the stomach. But once they enter the intestines, they face a different nightmare. The walls of our intestines are coated in a thick, highly viscous layer of protective mucus. The sources note that passive drugs often just get trapped in this mucus sludge and are eventually excreted without ever reaching the underlying tissue. How do the robots get through the slime?
This is where the twin bioengine aspect comes into play. Once the yeast capsule reaches the more neutral pH of the intestines, it degrades, releasing the internal nanobots.
Right into the mucus.
These bots are faced with that impenetrable mucus layer. To overcome it, they do not rely on passive diffusion. They are equipped with onboard active chemical engines, specifically layers of the enzymes glucose oxidase and catalase.
Enzymes acting as engines. How does that generate thrust?
The intestinal fluid is naturally rich in glucose. When the nanobot's glucose oxidase enzyme interacts with the ambient glucose, a rapid chemical reaction occurs, breaking the glucose down and generating a localized chemical thrust.
It creates a microscopic jet stream.
Exactly. The nanobots literally propel themselves forward, boring their way through the dense intestinal mucus at high speeds to deliver their payload directly to the underlying epithelial tissue.
That is mind-boggling. An enzyme-powered yeast torpedo swimming through the gut slime. Okay, let's move from the gut to the brain. We discussed the blood-brain barrier earlier, the absolute fortress wall of tightly packed cells that protects our brain from circulating toxins, but also stops roughly 98% of systemic drugs from ever getting in. It is the bane of neuropharmacology. How on earth do nanobots bypass the blood-brain barrier?
The most innovative approach doesn't try to force its way through the barrier, it outflanks it. It utilizes the nasal cavity.
Snorting nanobots, again, a heavy visceral reaction there.
It sounds alarming, but the anatomy makes it highly efficient. The olfactory nerve, which provides our sense of smell, extends directly from the upper nasal cavity, passes through a porous bone called the cribriform plate, and connects directly into the brain tissue.
So it's a back door.
It is a biological highway that completely bypasses the blood-brain barrier. Researchers have developed magnetically guided entities known as cellbots. They take living stem cells, functionalize them with magnetic nanoparticles, load them with neurological drugs, and introduce them into the upper nasal cavity.
And then they use the external magnetic fields to literally drag the living magnetized cells up the nerve highway.
Yes. The operators use precise magnetic gradients to pull the cell butts up along the olfactory nerve pathway across the cribriform plate and deposit them directly into specific regions of the brain to treat devastating neurological disorders like Parkinson's or glioblastoma tumors, completely avoiding systemic circulation.
Incredible. And the last administration route that really caught my eye was ocular delivery, treating the eye itself.
Ocular diseases, such as retinal vein occlusion or macular degeneration, currently require a highly unpleasant standard of care: repeated deep needle injections directly into the globe of the eye.
Ouch.
And even after the painful injection, the liquid drug relies on passive, incredibly slow diffusion through the thick, gelatinous, vitreous humor that fills the eye to eventually reach the retina at the back. It is inefficient and traumatic.
But with magnetic nanobots.
With magnetic nanobots, a single injection introduces a massive swarm into the vitreous fluid. An external rotating magnetic field is positioned over the patient's eye. The swarm instantly engages its helical propellers and rapidly bores through the dense vitreous humor,
They just swim straight to the back of the eye.
traversing the entire length of the eye to reach the retina in a fraction of the time it takes passive drugs to diffuse. It delivers a highly concentrated therapy exactly where it is needed, drastically reducing the frequency of those terrifying blind injections.
Okay. We need to take a deep breath here. Because listening to this, it sounds like we are standing on the precipice of a complete medical utopia. We are deploying mechanical drills to obliterate heart blockages. We are unleashing spinning sea urchins to tear drug-resistant cancer cells apart. We are swallowing yeast torpedoes and guiding magnetic stem cells into the brain. It sounds perfect. But my job is to push back and ground this conversation in reality. What is the catch?
There are always hurdles.
Because we are talking about injecting millions, possibly billions, of titanium, nickel, silica, and gold robots directly into the human circulatory system. The most glaring question I have, and I'm sure anyone listening has, are we going to get heavy metal poisoning from these things? When the surgery is over, when the magnetic field is turned off, where do the billions of micropropellers go? They don't just magically disappear.
It is arguably the most vital, pressing question in the entire field of nanomedicine. The primary hurdles preventing these miraculous therapies from being rolled out in your local hospital tomorrow morning are not related to whether the nanobots work.
Right. The data shows they work.
We have abundant data proving they work exquisitely well in murine models. The absolute roadblocks are biocompatibility, clearance kinetics, and the massive, unprecedented ethical and regulatory gaps they create.
Let's start with the clearance. Walk me through the timeline. The doctor turns off the magnetic field. My blood is full of dormant titanium corkscrews. What happens next?
The human liver is the body's primary, extraordinarily efficient detoxification organ, so it is the ultimate destination for the vast majority of circulating foreign particulate matter. Quantitative, in vivo studies tracking the distribution of magnetic nanomotors have mapped out a very specific, somewhat surprising timeline.
Okay.
In the initial phase, roughly 10 minutes post-injection, the bulk of the swarm, approximately 70%, remains freely suspended in general systemic circulation.
Okay, they're still swimming around, waiting to be filtered.
But as we enter the extended phase, about 4 hours post-injection, the distribution shifts dramatically, and not in the way researchers initially hoped. Only about 7% of the bots are actively detected in the liver for clearance.
Wait, where are the rest of them?
Approximately 35% of the swarm begins to actively absorb or physically stick to the interior walls of the blood vessels, clustering particularly heavily in the large abdominal aorta.
Wait, 35% of the heavy metal swarm is just permanently glued to the inside of my major arteries. That sounds incredibly dangerous. That sounds like it would trigger the exact blood clots and inflammation we are trying to cure.
It sounds alarming, and it is a major focus of ongoing safety trials. However, the current research indicates this vascular adsorption is largely reversible.
How do you unstick them?
Studies show that post-procedural perfusion with physiological saline, essentially flushing the vascular system, can unstick the majority of these trapped nanobots and force them back into active circulation so the liver can eventually capture them.
So they flush the patient with saline.
Furthermore, to mitigate the risk of long-term heavy metal toxicity, the next generation of these nanobots is increasingly being constructed from inherently biodegradable materials.
Biodegradable metals.
Biodegradable frameworks. Engineers are shifting away from permanent silica or solid gold chassis and moving towards specific formulations of mesoporous silica or organic polymers, which are designed to naturally hydrolyze and break down over a period of days or weeks.
And turn into what?
Completely non-toxic byproducts, primarily silicic acid, which the kidneys can easily filter from the blood and excrete harmlessly in urine.
Okay, so the newer ones melt away or get flushed out. But even in the short term, while they are active, there has to be a toxic limit. How many microscopic robots can a single human cell interact with before the physical stress or the chemical presence just kills the cell?
Cellular toxicity limits have been rigorously tested, and a specific operational window for safety has been established, primarily in murine or mouse models. The in vitro data demonstrates that individual living cells can safely handle the internalization or physical proximity of up to roughly 20 inorganic nanomotors each.
20 bots per cell is the limit.
Approximately. They handle that without exhibiting significant stress markers or undergoing apoptosis, which is cellular death. And scaling up to a systemic whole body level, the in vivo toxicity studies are highly encouraging.
What are the numbers there?
Doses of up to 55 milligrams of nanobots per single kilogram of body weight were injected into mice. Over a 7-day observation period, blood panels showed absolutely no significant spikes in liver enzymes, no elevation in kidney distress markers, and no indication of systemic organ failure.
So the science confirms there is a robust, safe dosage window where the biology can tolerate the mechanical invasion.
Exactly.
Okay, so the biological safety profile might be manageable with careful dosing and biodegradable materials. But what about the bureaucracy? You mentioned regulatory gaps. How on earth does a government agency like the FDA even begin to conceptualize, let alone approve, a medical intervention like this?
It constitutes a profound structural and regulatory nightmare for agencies worldwide. Let's examine it from the perspective of the FDA. The FDA categorizes medical interventions into rigid silos. It is either a pharmacological drug or it is a physical medical device.
Or binary.
How do you classify a swarm of autonomous, AI-driven, magnetically controlled, DNA-based robots?
Right. Because if Bronner's polymerism is delivering a payload of therapeutic plasmid DNA that alters cellular function, it fundamentally acts like a drug. It's a pharmacology.
Yes.
But if the Max Planck mechanical drill is using a titanium spike to physically bore through calcified plaque, or the MAUS is tearing holes in a membrane, they're functioning purely as physical surgical devices.
Exactly. The current regulatory frameworks were built in the 20th century. They were designed to evaluate the safety of static, unchanging chemical pills or inert, permanent titanium hip replacements.
They weren't built for swarms.
They were absolutely not built to evaluate dynamic, autonomous swarms that can change their physical behavior based on localized pH levels or alter their navigation based on real-time AI algorithms.
How do you even prove an AI swarm is safe in every possible scenario?
You can't, using current methodologies. The clinical trial testing protocols required to ensure absolute, infallible safety for a self-navigating, mutating swarm are completely unprecedented. It requires the FDA to invent entirely new fields of regulatory science just to write the rule book before trials can even begin.
And I imagine that bureaucratic friction leads right into the final massive hurdle.
Yeah.
Translation gap. It's one thing for brilliant scientists at Stanford to carefully handcraft a dozen perfect carbon nanotubes in a pristine multi-million-dollar university lab. It is an entirely different universe to safely manufacture billions of them for a global commercial hospital rollout.
The economics and the manufacturing scale-up present a brutal reality check. Transitioning from producing what the industry slightly derisively calls laboratory utensils bespoke, one-off creations to mass, commercial clinical production is agonizing.
It has to be perfectly uniform, right?
It requires maintaining a level of absolute quality control at the nanometer scale that is currently prohibitively expensive and technically difficult. Imagine a factory tasked with ensuring that every single one of a billion microscopic helical propellers has exactly 1.8 turns, 0 microscopic fractures, and a mathematically flawless Teflon coating.
Because if it's wrong...
A single manufacturing defect in a batch of 1 million bots could trigger a catastrophic immune response in a patient. Overcoming that translation gap will take decades of heavy industrial investment.
It is just a staggering scale of complexity, both biological and industrial. We have covered an unbelievable amount of ground today on this deep dive, and I hope we have fundamentally shifted how you look at the future of medicine.
It's a lot to process.
It is. We started by plunging into the bizarre, counterintuitive physics of the micro world, exploring the Reynolds number, and understanding that swimming through human blood is like a human trying to swim through wet cement. We looked at how scientists are abandoning the sledgehammer, instead building microscopic machines atom by atom with focused electron beams, and folding structural lumber out of single-stranded DNA to create programmable, AI-driven nanomachines.
And we witnessed how those intricate machines are being deployed to address humanity's greatest medical challenges. We examined the Max Planck Institute's mechanical drills physically debulking arterial plaque, and Stanford's brilliant Trojan horses hiding inside monocytes to switch off the CD47 "Don't Eat Me" signal.
And we explored Ally Bronner's DNA mail carriers, using 3D peptide keys to rewrite cellular instructions at Clemson, forcing disease cells to vomit out toxic cholesterol. And of course, we cannot forget the visceral horror and brilliance of the cancer battleground. Those magnetic gold sea urchins spinning at 16 hertz, literally tearing through the lipid bilayers of cancer cell defenses, paving the way for targeted drugs, and physically bypassing the barrier of chemical drug resistance entirely.
The paradigm of medicine is undeniably permanently shifting. We are moving away from treating the whole body passively and moving towards sending autonomous microscopic fleets to identify and surgically repair the exact cell that is broken. It represents the ultimate logical realization of precision medicine.
But I want to leave you with a final thought, something to mull over, that builds on the incredible trajectory of the sources we've discussed today. We talked heavily about these nanobots increasingly acting as autonomous, closed-loop systems, like the theoretical theranostic bots that can constantly monitor a tumor's pH, or skin nanobots that monitor hydration and release localized drugs automatically without you ever being aware of it.
Right.
If, in the near future, our bodies are permanently filled with circulating fleets of autonomous microscopic machines, constantly monitoring our biochemistry, identifying microscopic threats, and repairing our cells in real time, at what point does our immune system stop being a purely biological function and start becoming a digital, AI-driven software program? And if our underlying biology is essentially managed by software, what does it actually mean to be cured? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We will be back next time with another stack of fascinating sources. Stay curious.